Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I thank you for convening today's hearing and for the opportunity to testify. Appearing today in my personal capacity, I am Director of Research for NGO Monitor. Founded by Professor Gerald Steinberg in 2002, following the anti-Semitic proceedings of the 2001 Durban Conference Against Racism, described both in my written testimony and by Mr. Sharansky, NGO Monitor is a globally recognized research institute promoting democratic values and good governance. By publishing independent analyses of NGOs, their funders, and other stakeholders, we work to ensure that decision makers and civil society operate in accordance with the principles of accountability, transparency, and universal human rights. In a 2017 presentation, the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who served for over 20 years as the Chief Rabbi of the United Kingdom, was a member of the British House of Lords and an internationally renowned scholar, noted that anti-Semites often couch their anti-Jewish rhetoric in the language of the highest ideals of the day. During the Middle Ages, it was religion. In the 20th century, science. And today, it is human rights discourse which is used to mask and legitimize anti-Semitic agenda. The pathological obsession with Israel that permeates institutions and organizations that claim the mantle of human rights has led to the manipulation, distortion, and perversion of these truly lofty ideals. In my written testimony, I summarized several NGO-driven campaigns, including BDS initiatives, attempts to blacklist and sanction the IDF, threatening Israel with ICC investigations, and explicit calls for dismantling the Jewish state. NGOs that oppose Jewish self-determination have learned that adopting the language of human rights and international law is the most effective strategy for achieving their goals. However, when responding to acts of terrorism and violent anti-Semitism, many of these organizations reveal their true beliefs. Some actors ignore these phenomena altogether, while others, particularly officials at European government-funded Palestinian NGOs, justify violence. In my written testimony, I described how Human Rights Watch, HRW, invokes human rights principles to accuse Israel of committing apartheid and to lobby for a host of BDS measures. However, when the rights of Jews are violated, HRW is absent. In 2021, the ADL recorded 2,717 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, the highest total since the organization began tracking in 1979. HRW's 2022 World Report covering 2021 does not mention anti-Semitism in the United States even once. Jews appear to be the exception to the supposed pursuit of universal human rights. Abhorrent as this indifference is, the celebration of and justification for violence expressed by officials at European-funded Palestinian NGOs is uniquely disturbing. Take, for instance, the cases of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, PCHR, and Al-Haq, an organization whose terror ties, as well as its extreme anti-Zionist and international BDS campaigning, are described in greater detail in my written testimony. These two European government-backed NGOs are among the architects of many of the anti-Israel efforts detailed in my written testimony, successfully lobbying for the UN blacklist of companies operating beyond the 1949 armistice line, including American firms, as well as the launching of an ICC investigation into Israel, a worrying precedent for US officials and military personnel. As I described in my written testimony, Al-Haq in particular is one of the leading actors seeking to apply the apartheid label to Israel and defines the Jewish state as inherently illegitimate. Last month, as Islamic Jihad and other terrorist organizations launched over 1,200 rockets toward Israeli population centers, each one a war crime, PCHR published a statement in which it, quote, affirms the Palestinian people to resist the occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. Under pressure from donors, this text was amended. Statements by PCHR's board members and by officials at Al-Haq and other Palestinian NGOs reveal how pervasive those attitudes are. In a Facebook post published during the fighting, PCHR board member Nadia Abu Nakhla referred to Israel as, quote, the Nazi criminal occupation, adding, may the resistance, a euphemism for Palestinian terrorist organizations, have victory. Following a January 26th IDF operation in Jenin, in which 10 Palestinians, mostly armed members of terrorist organizations, were killed in a gun battle, Abu Nakhla wrote, quote, O he who guides the blood vengeances, may you guide our blood vengeance. Are these the words of a human rights defender? On January 28th, 2 days after the gun battle in Jenin, 7 Israeli civilians were murdered by a Palestinian terrorist outside of a Jerusalem synagogue. In an interview given 2 days later, the deputy chair of PCHR's board of directors said that Palestinians are not prevented, quote, from taking revenge against the massacres that are occurring in Palestine, adding, quote, the flame of Palestinian resistance shall not end, but continue as long as there's occupation, settlement, and Judaization. Al-Haq officials have also legitimized attacks on Israeli civilians. Following the massacre outside the Jerusalem synagogue, Al-Haq legal researcher and advocacy officer Asil al-Badja wrote, quote, why are settlers allowed to be in occupied Jerusalem, a war crime that the world recognizes? Adding separately, quote, forcing Palestinians to defend their right to resist is another complicity with Israel's colonialism. Just yesterday, she wrote, quote, shedding Palestinian blood and destroying entire families and futures is Zionism. She accompanied this statement with pictures of Palestinians killed in clashes with the IDF this week, including 2 Hamas members who murdered 4 Israeli civilians just 2 days ago, and 3 members of Islamic Jihad killed last night after they opened fire at an Israeli border crossing. There are other such statements from board members and officials from these and other European government-funded Palestinian NGOs, but to catalog them all would require more time than we have here today. Allow me to conclude with a word on the European funding that I've been referencing. In recent years, Al-Haq has received grants from the European Union, as well as from the governments of France, Germany, Italy, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. PCHR has received funding from the European Union, as well as from the governments of Switzerland and Norway, and from UN agencies. The director of PCHR, Raji Sourani, a man who has been publicly celebrated by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a US-designated terrorist organization, was hosted this week by Dutch officials in the Netherlands. In addition to being funded by European governments, both organizations are cited and relied upon by UN agencies and mechanisms and have interacted directly with the ICC. Simply put, this must end. Organizations like these, of which there are unfortunately many more, should be expelled from the policymaking community, not funded, sought after, and consulted with. Governments, UN frameworks, and international legal bodies, as well as ESG firms and other corporate actors, should shun these groups and implement effective vetting measures that ensure that no like-minded actors are supported or their reporting relied upon in the future. There can be no Jewish exception to the cause of universal human rights, nor should those professing violence be permitted to masquerade as human rights practitioners. I thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to the subcommittee's questions.